This build is absolutely insane. It honestly just destroys the whole endgame. Here you can see me doing over 500k DPS with a tier 3 breach boss. I didn't even get to see any mechanics. And honestly, I'm not even close to fully optimized. The build could probably do well over 5 million DPS when max. It is also the most insane leveling build I've ever played. I made a brand new character, and within 15 hours, I was doing T15 maps. How crazy is that? I'm Sanctum from Goblin-Inc, and this is my strength stacking monkling guide. This build is enabled by two things. First of all, the Pillar of the Cage God Quarterstaff, which gives us 10% weapon damage per 5 strength, and strength, as you probably know, also gives us 2 life, which, and the whole reason why we're a Gemling, with enhanced effectiveness, we get double the bonus out of strength, which means for every strength point we get 4 life. And as you can see, we have a lot of strength. In fact, I'm at 1k strength. Well, 984. It's just about 1k. You might think this build is simple. At the end of the day, we're just stacking attributes, right? And mostly strength, but it really is not that simple. You'll quickly find out, as I did, while experimenting with this build with my good friend Liggles, that stacking attributes and still being tanky, even though we're getting so much out of strength, is just not easy because it's really hard to max your resistances. So in this build, you'll find a lot of tricks to essentially boost the power of your character for actually quite cheap. And for the skills, well, that's where the name of the build comes from, monkling. We essentially just play like a monk, except in the body of a mercenary. We're basically a better version of Ace of Spades. Let me show you. For single target, we use Ice Strike, which is just a great skill because it's not only does it do a lot of damage, it freezes, and it has a mini teleport build to it, which makes us clear way faster than we otherwise could just walking, you know? And we pair that with Martial Tempo, Conk Effect, because we don't care about the less area, you know, this is a melee skill. We get 40% more damage from this. Close Combat, and Inspiration. And why Inspiration, right? It's DPS loss. Well, you really don't want to be spamming mana pots. And as you can see now, this really doesn't cost too much, right? 1 mana pot, you know, and I'm out sustaining the cast of Ice Strike. So that's why Inspiration. And then we use Charge Staff, which, let me show you. We actually travel a long way to enable Charge Staff. We gotta go all the way here to Resonance. So I guess I might as well explain Resonance and Combat Frenzy now. Basically, Resonance makes us get power charges instead of frenzy charges, which we then use with Combat Frenzy, which gives us a frenzy charge when we freeze. Again, another reason why cold damage is really important. And we pair Combat Frenzy with Profusion for more charges. Cannibalism, this is actually, you know, I was actually struggling a bit in T15 maps before I found this support gem. 4% life recovered on kill on a build with so much damage and so much AoE just makes you virtually unkillable while you're speed clearing mobs, right? And then Vitality for even more life regen, right? That was one weakness of the build before I figured out how to solve the life regen, and these two really solve it for you, you know. So yeah, Combat Frenzy is how we get our power charges when combined with Resonance. It's the best way, honestly. To generate charges for Charge Staff. And why is Charge Staff so important, right? Why do we travel all the way over here for it? Well, first of all, we don't really mind traveling that much. I'll explain that later, but we don't really mind much. But also, Charge Staff not only does it add 102% more damage, right? To give you an idea, Ice Strike does 193, so basically 50% more damage, right? On a line AoE. Also, it adds more damage to all our attacks, right? We consume 3 charges, that's 3 to 60 added quarterstaff lightning damage, which is huge. And then also we use it to freeze more. So that shows on the support gems. We use Glaciation, more freeze. Problem Environment, more damage. Ice Bite, when we freeze, all our attacks do 35% more damage. This is huge. You really want to try to freeze often with Charge Staff. And Cold Exposure. Usually, we can only penetrate mobs' resistances to 0, but minus resistance effects, such as exposure, override that and can make the resistance go beyond 0 to the negatives, which is great. So we essentially use Charge Staff as a dual weapon, you know, as more damage, but also a lot of utility, right? And more damage for our other skills. If we had a 6th link, we would also add Frost Nexus, which Frost Nexus creates a chilled ground when we freeze, which just makes the enemies, you know, move slower, attack slower, which is great. And why is freezing so important, right? Why do we spend so much, you know, making our Charge Staff freeze more, right? And the answer is Herald of Ice. Herald of Ice is most of our AoE, right? Charge Staff adds a little bit, but the real AoE comes from Herald of Ice. And the condition for Herald of Ice to work and explode and kill all the mobs is the target be frozen, right? If the target is not frozen, no, Herald Light doesn't do anything, right? So that's why we need so much freeze and we need so much cold damage. And how do we support Herald Device? Magnified Effect, Elemental Focus, Cold Mastery, and Cold Penetration. Basically just more damage. And for the Starler shown single target, we have Tempest Spell. I mean, I think no one's a stranger to Tempest Spell. It's a disgustingly good skill. You can see it in the clips. I mean, when I drop it down, it just melts bosses. But we pair it with Immolate, which means we actually want some fire damage on our gear, or, you know, on the tree. I'll show you on the passive tree how you can get some fire damage, but we basically want some fire damage. If you don't have fire damage and you can't ignite, you see that you're not igniting the bosses ever, what you want to do is replace this with Super Critical. Next is Leverage, which gives us increased critical hit chance against immobilized enemies, right? And what is immobilized? Heavy, stunned, or frozen. Tempest Bell, heavy stuns, and we also freeze a lot, clearly, so this is basically always up, which is great. Then Rage Force. Consume 10 rage if possible to deal 35% more damage. The way rage works is 1 rage is 1% more damage, right? So we want rage. We already want rage. And the way we get rage is from the passive tree. We take 2 or 3 of these jewels that give rage on hit, and that usually gets us to the cap of 30, you know? Ideally, I mean, we can go even a step further and get these rage on hit with maximum rage jewels, but it's not necessary. You know, you need 2 or 3 rage on hit. Maximum rage is just extra gravy on top, you know? And basically, that's how we generate rage for Rage Forge. And why do we put this here and not on somewhere else? Well, imagine, right? If we put this on Ice Strike, we would just be consuming 10 rage, 10 rage, 10 rage, 10 rage. It wouldn't be viable. So we put it here, Tempest Spell, because it's a lasting effect, right? And it lasts the whole duration of the spell. And then lastly, Heavy Swing. Heavy Swing is really not great, but better than nothing. There's really not much more we can put here. And then I guess there's 2 things I had to show. Lightning Rod is a little trick that I found where if you do, maybe you can see it in the clips, but if you do Lightning Rod and then you put Orb of Storms, you see how there's a chain reaction going off, and when you put a bell on top of that, those chain reactions hit the bell actually, and the bell just goes off and evaporates enemies. And so that's why we use Lightning Rod. And we use Lightning Rod with Scatter Shot for more rods, and then I just put random gems on. These don't do anything, but Scatter Shot, that's it. And then we combine that with Orb of Storms with Chain for more chains, for more chain reactions. Overabundance to have 2 of them at once, and then Unleash to be able to cast 2 at once. As you can see, well, you can't see because it's hidden, but there's actually 2 there, right? We have 2 Orb of Storms going. And lastly, the last skill we use is Hand of Chayula. And Hand of Chayula is only used on bosses, right? And why do we use Hand of Chayula with Freezing Mark and Hypothermia? Well, basically, as I said before, the only way we can generate power charges with Combat Frenzy. Combat Frenzy requires us to freeze, right? We don't electrocute, we don't pin, so we have to freeze. And also, if we don't have charge stuff up, which requires power charges, we freeze less, right? So we gave charge staff glaciation. We also have added cold damage, as you'll see in the gear later, right? Basically, not freezing once kind of slows down the whole build, right? It's like a compounding effect, right? So we add these things on Hand of Chayula to freeze faster and get the build going on bosses, right? Sometimes you reach a boss and you already have charges, you already have a charge staff up, and you don't really need Hand of Chayula. You still want to do Hand of Chayula because it's more damage, you know? But basically, it ensures you can get going on a boss. And then lastly, we do Hide and Curse. As you can see, I have over 8k life now. But the road here wasn't easy. The build, I'm not gonna lie to you, if maxed, like fully maxed, can get quite expensive. These gloves, for example, cost me about 5 divines. And this chest about 10 divines, right? So the build can get really expensive. And it can get even more expensive if we include Astromentis, which costs over 50, I think 100 divines, and Ingenuity build. But the good thing, we don't actually need these uniques for the build to perform well. I was doing T15 maps way before I got these uniques, right? Already sold my rares, but these are the type of items I used to essentially get to the end game before I could afford these uniques. As you can see, right, these items are not expensive. You know, this one costs 2 exalts, this costs 5, and you can see in the chest, and this base is really important, regenerates life per second, right? 3 exalts, 8 exalts. These items are not expensive, and they really carry you quite strongly in the end game. And for the rest of these type of items, you can check the written guide, where I have items like these, right? And on the written guide, I will also link to searches, so you can search for these items yourself, like the filters, right? And that will help you out. So the gear is honestly quite self-explanatory, right? We look to have a lot of life everywhere, a lot of strength, and a lot of resistances. Those are the most important stats. On the rings, we do want all attributes. I mean, obviously it's strength too, but it's dex and int, and as you know, we get a lot of good dex and int scaling with these two items. So you want all attributes on the rings and on the amulet. The amulet is actually the best source for attributes. As you can see, I even juiced it up with the attribute modifier, Catalyst, and look at this. Look how many stats it gives me. It's really important. Getting a good amulet is really important. And on the amulet, we anoint Titanic, which gives even more strength. The uniques you get, I would say in order of importance, obviously, Pillar of the Cage God, that's the start of the build. Without this, the build wouldn't work. Then the second most important one, I would say, is Warrior Invictus. Warrior Invictus just gives us a ridiculous amount of attributes and max life, but it's expensive. I would save up for this one before Hand of Wisdom in Action. Hand of Wisdom in Action is just pure damage, and we can get gloves with quite a lot of damage without needing to resort to this. So this is, I would do Warriors, then Hand. I guess I would do Warriors, then Black Sun Crest, only because it's cheap, but in reality, Hand of Wisdom in Action is more important. This helmet seems good, but it's not that good. It's okay. I found one with Regenerate, Corruption, but it's really not needed. And I told you guys, full damage is extremely important, right? And you can see here, I really urge you to try to find rings with cold damage on them, right? It's extremely important because when you don't freeze, you just don't have any AoE. And despite, let's say, your tooltip DPS going down, if you added a lot more cold damage, it's worth it, right? There's even maps that give mobs a lot of freeze threshold, which makes them really hard to freeze. That's the thing, right? We generate our power charges when we freeze. So if we don't freeze, not only do we not shatter, and we don't get a huge explosion with Herald of Ice, we can't even cast Charge Staff, which is half our DPS or more. You know, it's really important. For that reason also, and I suggest you do this before you start leveling, I would try to buy a lot of Pillar of the Cage Gods and corrupt the added cold damage. And then in the early game, it would be better to have more cold damage here, but there's no need. This build destroys the whole campaign, so you might as well just socket it with the endgame jewels, the endgame soul cores that give penetration. And for the weapon swap, we use Quill Rain because it makes us shoot the rods really fast, and just a quiver. Any quiver with attack speed works. You know, there's probably something better with attack speed implicit. It really doesn't matter too much. You know, for our Ascendancy, what we do is, first of all, we grab Enhanced Effectiveness. This is the reason why we play this character, right? So we grab this first, obviously, and then we get Quality of all skills, Crystalline Potential. This is just generally strong, right? And this one, it might seem bad, right? 30% less cost of skills. How good is that? Look, let me tell you, we have no mana regen in this build, and you really don't want to be chugging mana potions. It feels awful. Getting 30% less cost of skills is quite good, especially when you pair it with Inspiration. As you can see, we almost don't spend mana, right? What we do with the passive tree is honestly quite interesting. Early on, I realized that jewels are just much stronger than passives in this game. In this build, it's made even stronger by the fact that we actually like to travel to nodes, right? Because we get strength, and we get double the bonus from that, and we get strength scaling, right? So essentially, we grab all the jewels we can. In this build, we actually have 14 jewel slots, which sounds kind of insane, right? You may think, okay, but that's Sanctum, that's really expensive. How do I fill 14 gem slots with good jewels? And let me tell you, it's actually not that hard. Most of my jewels costed 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 exalts, no more than that. And there's a trick to get really insane jewels, and I'll show you the trick. You get to search for jewels with 1 or 2 good stats and a resistance corruption. This is what lets me cap my res. As you can see, all my jewels have resistance. Every single jewel has resistance. And look at this one. It even has max lightning and resistance. It's an insane jewel, and I got it for, I think, 5x. You see, all the jewels have resistance, and this is the way I cap. Without this, it just would be too hard to cap, because I have so many affixes reserved to attributes to give me life and just damage. So I can't really get much resistances, and I recur to these gems to do it. So what do we do while we're grabbing all these jewels? Well, as I said before, we got Resonance, because Resonance is what enables us to get power charges, because we generate Frenzy charges with Combat Frenzy when we freeze, and those become power charges with Resonance. So that means we can then use our Charge Staff. We grab this node, right? This is insane, an insane node. It even comes with 3% attack speed on the nodes before, and then 25 dex. Because remember, we get attack speed scaling from dex on our gloves and our weapon. So this node is just insane. But beyond that, it's just mostly grabbing the jewels, traveling, a lot of traveling. Then we grab almost all the good nodes. Well, basically all the good nodes around our time lost diamond. We grab polymathy. Look at this, 4% extra fire damage from the time lost and 10% attributes, which is insane. We grab this node, 25 strength, crazy node, unbending, more life. As I said before, we anoint Titanic because the traveling is just not worth it. It's just worth it to anoint. Really endgame, like very endgame. We'll anoint spaghettification, 7% increased attributes, but it's very expensive. The isolation distilled emotion is not cheap at all. I think the last time I checked, it was 400 exalts or something. So yeah, that's out of the question. And then we grab these two nodes are actually quite good in conjunction. Something that's important to understand is the more maximum elemental resistance you have, the better it gets, right? Because for example, when you go to 80% to 90%, which is the cap, you take half damage because you go from taking 20% damage, elemental damage, to 10%, which is half, you know? So you get twice as tanky from going from 80 to 90. It's just basically a long way of saying grab all the maximum rest you can get. The more the better. That's why I also try to find these jewels, which are not easy to find, with maximum resistances and the resistance corruption. You know how before I told you the order in which you should buy uniques? Actually, scratch that. The first unique you should buy is not an item, it's a jewel. It's one of these. Against the Darkness Time Lost Diamond, which gives so much chaos rest. I think it's giving me right now 42% chaos rest. It really, I could tell you it's the only way to cap chaos rest. And you know what? It sounded like a lie in my head, but it's not a lie. It's actually the only way you can cap chaos rest in a reasonable manner. So this should be your first buy. One of these. The second stat, the best in order would be strength, then extra either fire or cold, because actually igniting is quite important because when we ignite, we buff the damage our bell does because of the immolate gem. So fire is pretty good. But yeah, strength. Also, you can get life. There's many good ones, right? But the most important, what you actually need is chaos rest. All the really important unique jewels we use are 3 Grand Spectrum rubies. These can be sniped for 1 divine. Obviously, prices vary, but I sniped them for 1 divine. And what happens is when you use 3, each one gives you 6% maximum life for a total of 18%. And that's how I have over 8k life. Before I got these, I had barely 7k. As for leveling, what's the trick for leveling? How did I level so fast? How did I get to T15 maps in 12 hours? Well, I'll show you. I basically bought these 1 Exalt uniques. I had some other rares that cost me, I think, even less than Exalts, but I was willing to pay 1 Exalt because 1 Exalt is nothing. But basically just bought some twinked uniques, you know, 44 strength, 30 strength, rage on melee hit, you know, strength, basically good leveling uniques. And I pre-corrupted my Pillar of the Cage God, because you can equip it at level 1, you know? After you beat the first boss, you go to town, you get this bad boy, and you start dealing some massive damage. And what I did for leveling is, first I played with Glacial Cascade until I can unlock Ice Strike, and then I just played essentially how I play this build in the endgame. Just Ice Strike around and kill everything, you know? Which is pretty good. It was pretty fun. You can see in some clips here, well, maybe it's not one-shotting bosses, but quite close to it. So the leveling experience was not only fast but fun. You know, it's kind of sad because you have so much fun and it goes so quickly. But you know, the end game is even more fun, so that's good. And that's the build guide. And most of all, I would say this build is just really fun to play. And not only is it really fun, it's really rewarding in a difficult way to explain. Basically, you're hunting for these expensive uniques that just skyrocket the power of the build, and when you get them, it feels so good. And not only that, also the rares, which maybe are not even that expensive, but they're hard to find. And when you get them, your power just skyrockets when you get all these attributes with the damage, you know. And all the little upgrades you get, really, you feel them. Like you really feel all the upgrades. It's not like you get an item and you can't really tell if there's anything different. No, trust me, every single upgrade you'll feel in this build, which honestly to me it feels really good. I love it. I recommend you guys play it too.